when you encounter people who accept the modern critical text and modern translations that are based on those modern critical texts, you will often hear promoted views and ideas that they often have heard from other people, and a lot of times those ideas are not based on, I think, sound reasoning or evidence. And so I want to see how many of these myths, 7 myths of modern text criticism we can cover. The third myth. The modern critical text method is consistent with the classical Protestant doctrine of the providential preservation of Scripture. So sometimes in these debates, I've said, we believe in the preservationist model and you believe in the reconstructionist model. And sometimes they've said, no. Our view is also consistent with the doctrine of preservation. When they say this, they will usually suggest to us that God has preserved his word in the mass of extant manuscripts. That's how he's preserved his word. And I would suggest that that is at the counter opposite to what the Protestant Orthodox believed about what preservation was. I've already demonstrated this through some citations from John Owen. Let me recite one of his citations. He wrote, "Let it be remembered that the vulgar copy, that is the received or traditional text, we use, was the public possession of many generations, that upon the invention of printing, it was the actual authority throughout the world. Let that then pass for the standard, which is confessedly its right and due." So they said, the text we have, the printed text we have, it is the autograph. The modern critical text position, however, offers a completely different definition and scenario for understanding God's preservation. You will often hear it expressed as something like this: God has preserved his word somewhere in the mass of extant Greek manuscripts. Now it is the task of modern text critics to sift through the data and reconstruct the text for us. From their perspective, the watershed for preservation is not the Reformation, not the printing press, but the modern discoveries of Sinaiticus and Vaticanus and the papyri, and the development of the science of modern text criticism. Consider the title of Bruce Metzger's classic and influential textbook, The Text of the New Testament, subtitled, "Its Transmission, Corruption, and Restoration." I find that modern critical text scholars often like to use a puzzle analogy to describe what they believe their task is. So Wasserman and Gurry, in their introduction to the CBGM, write, "What is left behind are fragments, chance survivals from the past. We are trying to fit together the puzzle with only some pieces." See, we don't have all of it. We've only got some of the pieces. In the case of textual criticism, this means that we only have a selection of the manuscripts that once existed, and sometimes incomplete manuscripts. Although New Testament textual critics are usually straining under the number of manuscripts we possess, there must be an even greater number that are forever lost. So they are sorting through the pieces, the puzzle pieces, and they're not sure they have all the pieces, if they will ever have all the pieces, and they're not sure if they will ever be able to put it all together. And yet this is God's providential preservation. He allowed these manuscripts to survive, and now he has raised up this generation of heroic scientists who will try to put the puzzle pieces together for us. Do you see the disconnect between the classic Protestant view that Owen had of providential preservation and this newfangled modern view? Even some of the modern critical text advocates recognize that this is clearly the case. Let's go back to Dan Wallace. I pillared him a little bit today, but I do appreciate the fact that he is actually quite honest about his views. He has written plainly in the past that he personally rejects the Westminster view of preservation, and that he sees it as unbiblical and as not fitting with the goals of modern textual criticism. He wrote extensively about this in an article in the early 90s, published in the Grace Theological Journal, titled "Inspiration, Preservation, and New Testament Textual Criticism." He summed up his thoughts more recently in a book titled "Perspectives on the Ending of Mark," in a chapter he contributed to it, in which he wrote the following, quote, "I don't hold to the doctrine of preservation. That doctrine, first formulated in the Westminster Confession of Faith of 1646, has a poor biblical base. I do not think that the doctrine is defensible, either exegetically or empirically, end quote. Again, I appreciate the fact that he's honest, and he recognizes he rejects the traditional view of the providential preservation of Scripture. The idea that modern text criticism and its quest to put together the missing puzzle pieces is equivalent to the view of providential preservation as expressed in the Westminster Confession of Faith is mythical.